Welcome to Heian Haven. I'm Dawn. Today we're discussing Chapter 22 of the Tale of Genji, Tamakazura. We'll start with our usual summary for shared context. Despite the years, Genji has never forgotten Yugao, the Lady of the Evening Faces. Ukon, her former gentlewoman, was retained in Genji's service until his exile at Suma, when she entered Murasaki's service. She wishes her former mistress had lived, and believes she would have been looked after much the same as the Akashi lady. The whereabouts of Yugao's daughter, fathered by Tono Chujo, remained a mystery to Ukon. The child's nurse's husband received orders to Kyushu, and not knowing where to find their mistress, and unable to contact her father, they took the young girl with them, traveling by boat. Years later, the nurse's husband grew ill, and on his deathbed gave the injunction to his 3 sons to return the girl to the capital. In grief and fear, the nurse let years pass. The young woman attracted suitors, and a rumor that she had a defect was started to deflect attention. It didn't work. A well-known gentleman of the 5th rank, Taifu Nogen, began to attempt courting the young lady. Assisted by 2 of the nurse's sons, he visited, and the nurse delayed what he assumed to be a wedding date until the next month. The oldest of the 3 sons was offended by his younger brothers advocating for someone of such low rank to marry the comparatively much higher-ranked young lady. With difficulty, he quickly arranged travel back to the city. The young lady, her nurse, and the nurse's oldest son and younger daughter fled Heisen province, afraid that they would be followed by the unwanted suitor. The party arrived at the capital and found poor lodgings with an acquaintance. In the fall, the oldest son decides that they are to go on pilgrimage, first to Yawata and then on foot to Hasadera. At the base of the mountain, the Kyushu party stopped to rest, and Ukon's party arrived while they were there. Ukon soon discovers the lost child she has been praying for on her pilgrimages was in the same room. Eventually, the 2 parties combine and go into retreat together for a few days. The nurse asks Ukon to find a place for the young lady and contact her father, Tono Chujo, the palace minister. Ukon explains their mistress's death and Genji's desire to find the girl and claim her as his own daughter. They exchange information before separating. Ukon went to Genji's Rokujo estate, and after being summoned, discreetly informed her lord that she had found Yuga's child. Genji decides to bring the young woman to Rokujo and tells Ukon not to inform her father. Genji writes to the young woman, who is troubled by the proposal, but sends a poem in return, knowing her calligraphy and words were being judged. He decides that she should live in the unused library in the northeast of the estate. His mind made up, he tells Murasaki the entire tale. The young woman was first moved to Ukon's residence. Attendants were found, and her wardrobe was prepared before she moved to the Rokujo estate in the 10th month. Genji puts her in the care of Hanichiro Sato. Visiting with his new charge, Genji discovers the young woman to be beautiful and incredibly well-mannered for someone who was raised in the provinces, and shares this with Murasaki. Genji's son is informed he has a sister, and he presents himself to be of service to her. Tamakazura, as the young woman is typically called, has her household organized, and the nurse's son is given a position on her staff. For the new year, Genji carefully chooses new outfits for each of his women, and receives appreciative letters in return. Suetsu Muhana, Princess Safflower, who lives in the eastern pavilion of the Nijo estate, sends a dingy yellow robe and an antiquated poem. After he has finished his monologue about poetry and the education of women, Murasaki reminds Genji to send a response. The last bit of this chapter, and its descriptions of women's robes, is a treasure trove of information that I'm very excited to discuss, especially because each translator does it a little differently. And those will be the majority of our translation differences. But I'd like to start, as we often do, with the title. Waley is the outlier here. He has translated the title of the chapter and what we call the young woman that this chapter is centered on, Tamakazura. All of our other translators use Tamakazura, with zu instead of tsu. But our other translators each put their own spin on an English translation. Seidensticker uses the jeweled chaplet, a chaplet being a wreath or garland worn on the head. I'll circle back to the jeweled part. Tyler, who says that Tamakazura resists translation, offers us the tendril wreath. Washburn has the translation and explanation I like the best, a lovely garland. Here's what he has to say about it. Kazura is a general term for vines or creepers. Since vines were used to fashion garlands for headdresses, the word kazura, written with a different Chinese character, came by analogy to refer to garlands. The word as it appears in the original text is written in the kana syllabary, so the dual readings are unavoidable. Tama means jewel or gem, but here is used as an aesthetic intensifier, emphasizing the beauty of the garland vines rather than the presence of actual gemstones. And here's where we circle back to Seidensticker. Because I read Washburn's explanation, I can understand why Seidensticker chose the title he did using jeweled. I would guess that Tyler's version pulls tendril as a descriptor from the poem the title is drawn from. That's how he translated Tamakazura in the poem, with all the connotations in it and the two poems tied to it. I'm actually going to look at these three poems in the next Waka Wednesday. The one other place where the differences really stand out for me is in Genji's monologue on women's education. It's here that Waley's bias comes through. I know you're shocked that he rolled some of his own era's societal standards into the text. In this instance, it's a reference to chastity, which none of the others even hint at. Essentially, women were expected to have surface knowledge of any number of courtly pursuits, but she should never specialize too much. I think of Murasaki Shikabu and Izumi Shikabu, both specialists in literature and poetry, and wonder if women who broke this mild taboo felt the judgment of society. If I recall properly from her diary, Murasaki Shikabu did. We know she tried to hide her knowledge of Chinese, but people still whispered about it. I recommend reading her diary for more insight. As a fun thing, pirates are mentioned in this chapter. That's right. As long as there were ships, there were pirates, and Heian Japan is no exception. Tyler calls them swashbuckling, and Seidensticker calls them ruthless. We should talk a little about pilgrimage, as it comes up a bit in this chapter. Tamakazura goes on what is described as the 3 prescribed annual retreats by Washburn. These retreats, where one would pray, fast, and undergo purification, took place during the first 15 days of the 1st, 5th, and 9th months. Some 6 months after returning to the capital, in the 9th month, the Kyushu party went on 2 pilgrimages, one to a Shinto shrine dedicated to Hachiman in Yawata, and the second on foot to Hasadera. The on-foot part is important for a number of reasons. First, the young lady would not be used to walking any kind of distance, and 2, because of that and other reasons, making a pilgrimage on foot is considered more pious. Both of these sacred places still exist, and both pilgrimages were to offer thanks for their safe return to the city and to pray for a desirable outcome for Tamakazura. Offering thanks for prayers answered and praying for a good marriage are 2 of the relatively few reasons women would venture out. If you would like to know more about pilgrimages and the reasons women went on them, I've put a link in the description down below for my favorite resource. All 3 women, Tamakazura, her nurse, and the nurse's daughter, were in deep-brimmed hats with veils and traveling clothes. Now, traveling clothes are less specific clothes and more a particular styling of garments. This is not to say that special clothes weren't made for pilgrimages. They were, but the garments could be worn elsewhere and otherwise. They were part of a modestly ranked woman's normal wardrobe. I've talked about the traveling outfit a bit, and that I've made this ensemble. One of my favorite books shows how one was dressed in a traveling outfit. It's an undergarment, a kosode, the predecessor of the kimono, a hitue, an unlined robe with large sleeves, and an uwagi, a decorative outer robe that at home would be what you would wear to receive guests. The undergarment is maybe mid-calf length, but the other garments trail the floor a bit or quite a bit, and are belted up for ease of walking, because that was the point, being able to walk. For Tamakazura's traveling outfit, Waley describes her as a poorly dressed girl who had her hair caught tightly up in a scarf. From his earlier mistakes in translation that use the same word, and the language used by other translators, and my own knowledge, it's obvious that this scarf is actually what should be the outermost robe, an uwagi, just made of transparent silk, through which her hair can be seen. Let's note the use of gauze in the 9th month. Tyler says she was wearing something like an early summer shift over her hair, which was made of thin silk. A shift being a hitue, an unlined garment, according to the glossary. I find this interesting because the 9th month, modern October, is firmly late fall, actually the last month of it, and I had previously thought that gauze was limited to the summer. This particular point will come up again. Perhaps this is a bit of the shabbiness of her clothing in general, and maybe a bit of the provincial, wearing a garment that's out of season. Let's talk about gifts. There is quite a lot of gift giving by Genji. When he sends his first letter to Tamakazura, he also sends along gifts of cloth and or robes. When Tamakazura is removed to Ukon's residence to prepare for her transfer to the Rokujo estate, Genji provides brocades and damasks, robes for herself and all her staff. Beyond that, the almost last bit of this chapter is dedicated to the New Year's clothes he selects for each of his women. First, Genji receives cloth and gowns from weavers and tailors and has his storehouses emptied, including the robes that Murasaki has dyed herself. And that's a translation difference. Only Tyler and Washburn call this out specifically, that Murasaki has immense skill in dyeing, including variations in shading. Tyler speaks of beaten silks and reds, purples, and other colors that were divided, and with the help of many gentlewomen, made up into sets. This sounds to me like the sets of 5 or more robes that are worn in particular color schemes called Kasane no Irome. I will actually be making one of these sets soon. Stay tuned for a project announcement. There were 7 women Genji selects special robes for. The first is Murasaki. Waley describes her gift as a yellow kirtle with a flowered lining that was lightly diapered with red plum crest. He is the only translator that assigns a yellow robe to Murasaki. The 3 others call out some shade of purple, with decorations in plum pink or crimson. Washburn says that it's a purple robe with a crimson pattern, and the lining is crimson with a purple pattern. Seidensticker includes a footnote. There are doubts about several of the colors. Here, for instance, the original says only a stylish color. Purple or red is most likely. Washburn uses stylish as a descriptor. The other robe given to Murasaki, which Waley does not include, is lavender according to Seidensticker. Tyler calls out plum red. The Akashi princess receives a robe of white lined in yellow and a gown of red gauze according to Waley. Seidensticker, Tyler, and Washburn call out a robe in the cherry blossom style, white lined with red, and a second softened glossy robe. For Hanachiro Sato, our translators all essentially agree. She was given a light blue robe that was woven with a pattern that included seashells. This is definitive proof that non-nuns could wear blue for an outer robe. While I'm glad to have evidence of some garments in blue for women, I'm going to keep looking for evidence of a set of 5 robes in shades of blue. Waley describes a second robe of russet floss. Seidensticker calls it crimson. Tyler calls out red violet. Washburn says that this robe is a dark red gauze. This is where we circle back to the point about gauze being worn outside of summer. These ensembles are being given with the intention that the ladies wear them at the new year, which is also the first day of spring. So far as I knew, we're still dealing with lined gowns, and yet here we are with unlined gauze in early February. And as Genji is gifting this, there's no way he would give something to be worn at the new year that wasn't appropriate for the new year and spring, right? Yet Washburn actually says that the blue robe is a summer robe, which makes the 2 robes make sense together, but not for the new year. Tamakazura receives a red robe woven with Carria rose pattern, according to Waley. Seidensticker agrees that the one robe is red, but says the other robe is russet lined in yellow. Tyler describes a Carria rose, which is a golden yellow, robe, and another in clear red. Washburn's translation is similar, with a pure red robe with another robe of fallen leaf tan lined with yellow. Princess Safflower. Waley and Seidensticker missed the mark, confusing a willow layering, white over green, with a willow weaving, which was, according to Tyler and Washburn, a white weft and a pale green or greenish yellow warp. Everyone agrees that her robe had a pattern of Chinese vines upon it. For the Akashi lady, we again have a consensus. Her robe is white and decorated with plum branches, birds, and butterflies. Waley says the lining is dark purple. Seidensticker and Tyler says she gets a second robe in purple, while Washburn says it's dark red. Lastly, we have Itsutsume, Sakata, who is now a nun. She was sent a gray robe and a robe or robes from Genji's wardrobe. Waley says courtier's crimson lined with russet. Seidensticker and the rest describe the robe as blue-gray, and he and Washburn describe 2 robes from Genji, one yellow and another lavender. Tyler agrees that the robe sent to her is blue-gray, but his translation states that the 2 robes that the others say went to Itsutsume, Tyler asserts that these 2 robes in yellow and a sanctioned rose were for himself. I think Tyler may be wrong on this point. The messengers were all rewarded handsomely by the recipients, except for the one who brought a reply from Princess Safflower, Suetsu Muhana. She sends back an old robe with dirty, worn sleeves, what Waley calls an orange-colored, bedraggled old frock. But our other translators agree that it is yellow. Tyler calls it an orphan gown, as it was sent without the usual underrobe to go with it. In a footnote, he states, "The garment is utsu, empty, because it has no shift with it as it should." So here we learn that when a robe is given, it has the accompanying underrobe or hitoe with it. Reading through all the translations, I'm having my general feelings validated. Waley is simply wrong more than half the time with his clothing descriptions. Seidensticker occasionally misses the mark, but Tyler and Washburn typically get it right, Tyler slightly more so than Washburn. Having so many descriptions of clothing in this chapter was so very satisfying for me. Did you have a favorite part? What stood out for you in this chapter? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Join me next time for Chapter 23, Hatsune. Subscribe if you'd like to explore the Heian period of Japan with me through the Tale of Genji.